Hello, product people. Welcome to the Product for Product podcast, hosted by Matt Green, data advocate and product manager, and Moshe Mikanovsky, product leader and author. Our goal is to serve the product community by helping you find products that can help make your work in product management easier. Thanks for joining us on another episode of the Product for Product podcast.
Welcome back. Today, we're happy to have a few guests on the show to talk about product and podcasting. Let's go around and introduce ourselves.
Who want to start? Okay, I will start. So, hi everyone. We're very excited to be here, actually with video. So this will be also on the YouTube channel, but of course it will be also a regular episode. Hey Matt, I think everyone knows who I am.
Yep.
Moshe. Let's maybe start with Tracy.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks for having me on the show. I'm Tracy Laranjo. I am the host of Experiment Nation, the podcast. I primarily interview hotshots in the experimentation space, optimizers, some product managers, and had you, Moshe and Matt, on the podcast yourselves. It's a lot of fun, and it's been a great way to level up on experimentation.
And you've been on ours as well.
Yes, I have. Yes, the A/B testing series for Google Optimize.
Yep.
All of our guests have been on our podcast already.
That is a key link. It's a key thing to bring up. Aram, how about you introduce yourself?
Sure. Awesome. Thanks for having me back, Matt and Moshe. It's good to see you again. I'm Aram. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Crowdlinker. We're a digital product studio. I have two shows. One is called Product Innovation Series, and another one is called Off the Record with Aram. The Product Innovation one, I meet with some of the top leaders in product, from directors all the way to CPOs, talking about their journeys, building product teams, lessons learned, failures, and things like that. And then the Off the Record show has two tracks. One is I interview founders and VCs around their journeys building companies, raising money, investing in companies, and things like that. So, like Tracy, I had I had Moshe on our product innovation show, and then I was on their show as well.
Yep.
So good to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you.
And yeah, I'm Jason Knight. I am the host of a podcast called One Night in Product, spelled with a K. And I have been running that podcast for about 18 months now. Started out as a kind of a little hobby side project because I thought I needed something to do that wasn't work, and was very stupid in a way because what I did was start a podcast up about basically work. So that was definitely not one of my finest decisions, conceptually speaking at least, but at the same time, it's been a really interesting ride over the last 18 months, basically running a product management podcast, talking to a bunch of different product people, either kind of thought leaders, although I hate the phrase. So, speaking to some of the greats that have written some of the books and working for some really big companies, and also then speaking to some of the up and coming people as well. And I've tried to cast a really wide and diverse net and try and get people from all over the place, not just like the same old faces from the same old towns and the same old countries. I've had quite a few people from Nigeria, for example, and different parts of Africa, around Europe and stuff like that. So it's been really cool. And Moshe has been obviously one of my guests as well. We spoke some time ago now and did that, and I do remember coming on yours as well, talking about APIs as well. So I think it's it's been a wild ride.
Yeah, and I call them big kahunas. That's my preferred.
I hope you don't call them that to their face.
No,
I think they will like it. Why not?
And I just want to say, and for Jason, for your show, you're one of the, I guess, another reason why Moshe and I actually probably started a podcast. I think Moshe appeared on your show, and so we have you to blame for getting us caught in this this podcasting thing we're doing.
I'm going to take that in a good spirit, and not the fact that you thought that if I could do it, anyone could do it.
Yeah. It's a compliment. It's a compliment.
One confession that I have to make, and probably people have heard from me about it before, is that I don't listen to podcasts so much. So before I started this, I actually never listened to any podcast. And then people told me, you have to be on a podcast, you have to be in a podcast. And I'm like, or you have to create your own. I'm like, how can I create my own if I don't listen to anyone? So then I prefer to be a guest, and I think Jason, you were my second guest appearance or something like that on the podcast, and then I spoke with Matt, and he got me on the wagon to help, being a co-host for our podcast. And since then, I am listening to some podcasts, but I'm very picky about them because I don't have a lot of time. So usually it's people that I meet through our podcast or other people that I'm guesting on their podcast. So that's also nice. We also had other guests on Product for Product that are podcasters. They could not be with us today. So the plan was to have even a bigger panel. So we might do another panel in the future. But it's fun. When you do podcast, you actually get to know a lot of people that are in that business. Mm-hmm. And what we wanted to focus on today, with the same theme that we always focus on, product for product people, is if you want to start a podcast, what tools do you need for that? So what are the different tools that you're using, etc. And then also, how does you change from the beginning, the first times that you were podcasters to the time today? So how did it evolve over time? Because what you learned and what worked and what didn't work. And then the last thing is, I will not ask you to answer all this at once, but just for the audience, the themes that we're trying to cover today, the last thing is about how this experience helped you become even a better product person. So let's start maybe with, the beginning of starting a podcast and what tools you use then.
Awesome. Who wants to go first?
Whoever have the answer,
anybody can
go
jump
for it.
in. Yeah.
Okay, I'll go first. So I started these two podcasts because one, it was during the pandemic. So it was 2 years ago, I think we started it. Couldn't reach people, accessibility. Nobody was going to events or going in person anymore. So, okay, how can I connect and build these relationships? The test or the hypothesis was that if we could basically get to connect with these individuals and have good, genuine conversations and build relationships and share this content, then, through word of mouth and being top of mind, we could get some more exposure in terms of places that we've never gotten to before. Mm-hmm. And so kind of our mandate was like, let's try it, let's experiment. We have no idea what we're doing. Luckily, one of the marketing team members on my team is a podcaster. So he helped frame some of these things. And we started off with a product innovation show first, because that's been our focus for the last 10 years as a company, building product. But we saw that there was kind of a gap in terms of certain individuals. Primarily, we focused on enterprises in the beginning, where a lot of knowledge wasn't shared among other enterprises, as from the perspective of product and innovation leaders. So very kind of like closed group. Versus on the startup and scale up side, there's tons of communities about people talking about product all the time. Mm-hmm. And then that gradually evolved from enterprise then to like to other business sizes. And then our off the record show was talking about how to raise money, how to spend the money that you raise, really. Because we've over the years as well built relationships with VCs who invest in the companies that we work with. And, I was always curious to understand what kind of decisions do they make when they invest in these companies? How important is like allocating capital to product to them in like the decision-making process when companies come to them asking for their funding? And then on the flip side, how do entrepreneurs actually spend this money? Like once they get it, right? And I didn't have that knowledge. And so I think we've done about 50 episodes now in both shows. And, over time, I've learned a lot of things myself, built a lot of great connections. And, that's probably the most I could have asked for at the end of the day.
I think we hear it from everyone that the learning during doing this is such a huge thing that it's really
the product.
One of the main reasons to do that, not so much for other people to listen, but for us to learn about some things.
Yeah.
So that's pretty cool.
Well, I see it as three things. And some of this is somewhat retconned into the origin story of the podcast now. I'm pretty sure I didn't have any real plan to start with. But I think that for me, it's like there are three aspects to it. One of which is exactly what you just said, the ability to learn and continue to learn by speaking to all these great people as you go. That's definitely one of it. Another part of it is, especially when you're talking to maybe people that people haven't heard of before or from before, is giving them a chance to sharpen their act, for them to learn and for them to find their voice in a fairly low stakes. I mean, certainly to start with, fairly low stakes environment, like to start with, and basically still now I'm just some guy, right? Like there's no like high stakes. And the third thing as well is sharing it with other people, so other people can learn as well. So like if I can have a conversation with Marty Kagan or Melissa Perry about something and ask them some questions that maybe didn't get asked before, then that helps to share that story. I mean, of course, some people you pretty much know what you're going to get when you speak to them because they have a story and a line and they kind of say the same broad things most of the time. And the goal there is to try and tease a little bit out that you can't normally get out of them. But yeah, I mean, ultimately that for me, those are the kind of the three heads of the snake in a way, like the three things you can do with a podcast. And I think all of those are beneficial in and as of themselves. And but for me, certainly being able to kind of continually challenge my thinking, get my narrative straight, get new diverse opinions in my ears, as well as then sharing them, I think it's been massively helpful for my own personal development as well.
Yeah,
Nice.
I echo that as well. I love interviewing folks who maybe it's their first time podcasting. And if our episode ends up helping them get a job or open up other opportunities down the line, which it commonly happens, that makes me really happy to put that content out there for them.
Yeah, that's a great point, because it's, you know, it's, you're documenting this by being on a podcast and talking about a podcast. You're basically documenting like your experiences, what you know about the space. And so when it comes to getting other jobs and promotions and stuff like that, you're basically like, hey, this is what I know and this is how I think. And, you know, it's a record of reference for how you interact, even for how you are socially and stuff like that. So I think it's extremely valuable for people.
There is a flip side there, though, with regards to getting new people on. And I say this with all love and affection, but you can get some real bad audio quality from some of these people because like This is the first time they haven't got any kit. They're working it out themselves. And I think there should be some kind of podcasters or podcast guest starter pack that you can send out to people. That's
an interesting idea.
It is.
Yeah. Just plug in some headphones and please buy a $10 mic or something like that, rather than, you know, just, yeah. And again, I say that with, again, all love and affection, because, you know, some of these conversations have been great. And I guess it's, you know, I started out with a really poor quality microphone. And if I listen back to my initial episodes now, I very much classify it as kind of Simpsons season 1. Yeah, Homer's voice wasn't right yet, and they weren't quite drawn properly, and that then progressed. And obviously, I'd argue that I myself have progressed over time and got better at doing it. But you know, I listened back to myself back then, and imagine that if I had gone onto someone else's podcast back then, I would have been in exactly the same situation. So I definitely understand that people aren't going to be, you know, not going to have arms and, you know, like boom arms and pop shields and microphones from the off. But I think it might be, you know, I would always recommend to anyone that's going to be trying to guest on him, even if they're not doing their own, to at least try and get some really basic, simple equipment, just because it makes all the difference, both from an editing perspective, but also it makes them sound great as well, which is obviously good for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Even from a host perspective, I mean, I've been through like probably 3 different microphones, you know, to the headsets here. And, you know, we learned that along the way. If you listen back to our intro episode with me and Moshe, it sounds like we're talking in cups or something like that. So,
well, just looking now at everyone here, you guys have really big microphones there.
Yeah.
And and I'm like, yeah, I'm like, you know, really jealous here with my.
I have one over there, but
with a little microphone here. But it seems to be doing the work, I guess. But this is also about the progression of the podcast. And it's also, I think, a bit about how critical we are when we listen to it versus other people. I noticed that it's actually very hard to get feedback from people about the podcast. Some people will say, oh, I listened to this episode, it was great, and I learned from it, and that's it. And it's very sporadic. So are you in your tools of doing this out there? And I know some of you, like Aram, you have like a whole team helping you with that, which I sometimes really envy. But do you also have ways or tools to get this feedback from people and to make you improve the product, the podcast?
Yeah, for sure. One of the things that I do when I do the recordings with the guest speakers is that I book an hour, but then I have about 5 to 10 minutes after the recording to just debrief with them, to ask them like how everything went, what did they think. And it's funny, like a lot of the times everybody's always thinking, well, how do you think I did, right? Which is always funny to see that happen.
You're the expert,
right? Exactly.
The host, you're the expert, yeah.
Right. But that debrief, where I get feedback in terms of like some of the responses, or like some of the things that maybe we could do better next time, which is very helpful. We get a lot of our insights, I think, through doing like polls and surveys to people who came on the show, in terms of like follow-up campaigns. And that really helps us kind of figure out what is like the next thing we want to talk about. And our team recently did a research analysis around what are some of the most growing or popular type of topics being discussed by some of the people that we want to get on the show, in their Twitter, on other kind of like platforms, for our own research purposes. So we could plan better conversations that are probably going to hit better with the audience in terms of performance and stuff like that. So that's been something that we've been doing recently, and that's been, helping a lot.
Yeah. If you found any tidbits about products people want to learn about, let us know.
Will do.
What about Jason or Tracy? Do you hear from the audience? Do you have ways to hear from the audience, not just from your guests, but also people that actually are downloading the episodes and listen to them?
I can go first. This is not something that I currently do, but it is something I absolutely want to start doing. I'd absolutely want to start soliciting feedback on episodes. I think in the last few months, I've really tried to tighten up our episodes. They tend to get very long, and I love to go on tangents, and guests love to go on tangents. So that was kind of just one bit of feedback that I got from the smaller Experiment Nation community. But yeah, I would love to start sending out surveys and really find out from actual listeners what else can improve this podcast. I would love to do more of that.
Just a tip on that. If you use the free Zoom that allows you only 40 minutes, it makes you much tighter on the you cannot go on tangent because you have a limited time.
Your time block.
True. Yeah, we use Zencastr. I don't think there's a limit on Zencastr, so I can go all day.
It makes editing a lot easier too when you don't go on tangents.
Yeah.
So when I edit the shows, I have a much easier time.
Yeah. What about you, Jason?
Yeah, I think for me, I mean, I don't believe there's a great solution for getting feedback. For example, I always used to do the readout at the beginning. Oh, hey, please give us a 5-star review on the App Store or on Apple Podcasts, and please leave a good, nice comment or whatever. And I mean, not everyone obviously uses Apple Podcasts to listen to it. Also, frustratingly, the ratings and the reviews are all basically geo-fenced as well. So like I can go and see like the GB ones or the US ones or the Canadian ones or whatever, but they're all in different places. I know there are aggregators, but most of the time it's as with anything, like it's the kind of Airbnb type thing or the Amazon thing where you only get like the really positive or the really negative. Now, I've been lucky that I've not had any really negative ones, but so far at least, but maybe people just haven't bothered to share that with me. I think that there's been a lot of social. I mean, I'm quite active on certainly Twitter, a bit LinkedIn, and you get a bit of feedback from that, either from guests or from people that have listened to it, or someone's sharing it saying, oh, this was a great episode or whatever. And, that's obviously always appreciated. Not really had much in the way of feedback where people say, oh, you should do this or you should do that. I think the only one that I've had is really like, oh, yeah, you should put chapters in your podcast so that we can skip to the bits that we want rather than, having to listen through, and we don't like having to listen to your little intro at the beginning or whatever. It's okay, fine. We'll just fast forward past it.
I love
fine.
the intros.
Exactly. That's the best bit. But I think that, I mean, I've had a lot of feedback around like, it's really well edited and stuff like that. I mean, I'm very anal over my editing, which is, to my detriment because it takes a long time and I do it all by hand.
Me too.
But, that's one of those, crosses you have to bear. But at the same time, that's kind of feedback that I do get. And it's something that I think, I kind of like to give people the all-star premium editing experience so that they can sound as best as they can. And I guess then kind of touching on the waffle part or the kind of tangent part, that's a way to kind of, I'm quite brutal with just cutting out all the stuff that I don't really think should be there anymore. And, that could be helpful. But at the same time, if you're having interesting chats with people, sometimes you want to just leave it in there anyway, because it's, a nice, interesting chat. And especially if you've got some person that you're probably never going to get on again because they're kind of high profile and they start going off on some great story about something, you want to keep that in, right? Because it's adding some of their personality and getting something different that you couldn't get from somewhere else.
Yeah, excellent.
Yeah, and so there is a mention of a product, Zencastr, and Jason and Tracy, you both are using it.
Yep.
Aram, I think you're using something different. I don't remember the name of it, so maybe you should mention what you're using. We're using Spreaker at Product for Product. I can give it to Matt maybe a bit more to talk about his experience in the beginning. We found some challenges with their application to record. So that's why we switched to Zoom to do the recording. So in the beginning, we were not very happy with the way that it was recording over there. And then Matt is using Audacity for the
editing,
for the audio editing. We're just doing audio.
Yeah, which is a great tool. I love that tool.
And it's free.
Yeah,
right.
Free. Yep.
So that's also very helpful for shoestring budget podcasts that are starting. So tell us a bit about the product that you're using for the main product that you're using for your podcasting, and what if that was the first one you used, or did you use another one and then you moved to that one, and what you like and what you don't like about it. That will be also interesting.
Sure. So we actually initially started off using Zoom, but then the bit rates and like the video quality was just so garbage. We found at times with some of the people that are on the receiving end, like, if they don't have the good equipment, it's just like we tried to like increase the output, but just, we decided to switch. So we moved to something called Riverside. And Riverside, I think it's like Zencastr in many ways. But the problem with them was, and we've unfortunately now decided to move off of them, was that they just kept freezing all the time. There's constant just like bugs happening all the time. People were just frozen, they reconnect, and like it screws up the whole experience. So we're trying out now Zencastr, and another one is Squadcast. Those are the two that we're trying out right now on some newer recordings. A lot more stable, more refined product. So definitely recommend Zencastr or Squadcast. I think Squadcast is 2 times more expensive than Zencast. But I think it has the ability to do like live streaming or like a live webinar versus Zencastr, which doesn't, which we want to try out. So like if you do that, maybe Squadcast is where you should go. Aside from that, we use rev.com to do all of our transcriptions. Really great product. And then we use transistor.fm to publish or manage all of our podcast channels. And then I think on like the video editing side, I don't know what my video editor uses, but I think it's Final Cut Pro, if I'm not mistaken. And he's like, I think like Jason really is anal about the video production quality because he does documentaries. And so those are some of the tools that we use. And then, logistically, we use something called Calendly to do all of the automated scheduling of pre-planning calls to the actual recordings. I don't know if you guys do this, but we have pre-planning calls first where we go through like a set of questions that helps us jog some topics in our conversation. And then 48 hours before the recording, we send out a run of show. And that run a show basically goes through an intro, question set, and an outro. So like everybody knows what they're walking into. And that helps kind of, for you, Tracy, I don't know, those questions basically help us know what we have to cover. And it's like super transparent. And a lot of the guest speakers said that it's very clear and straightforward in terms of how we work, which always helps for feedback.
Yeah, I do something very similar to that for Experiment Nation. We call it the prep sheet. So exactly like you, we'll send it out a few days in advance to the guest with a run through of what they can expect, all the topics we're going to hit, so that nothing's really a surprise. Some guests actually prefer not to look at the prep sheet beforehand because they just want to go in and kind of be natural. I am very much a prepper. I have to, it doesn't matter if I'm hosting or if I'm a guest on someone's show, I have to prepare. So the prep sheet is definitely key. Also, I use Calendly as well. So what we'll do is, as a guest is signing up for their recording slot, we'll ask them a bunch of questions like, first off, what are your pronouns? I don't want to call someone the wrong pronoun and then potentially insult them. I'll ask them, how do you want to be introduced? And then I'll also ask, what topics can you talk for hours about? What are you passionate about? What can our listeners learn from you? And from there, I take what they put and then try to customize a topic that's true to their interests and what they like. I think what I would like to do going forward is actually hop on a very quick call with guests beforehand. A lot of it is just kind of digital back and forth conversation. So it would probably be a lot better to have that face-to-face going forward. But yeah, I hear you on that. I can't really speak to my editing process or anything like that because I'm very privileged in that I don't do the editing. Yeah, very lucky there. Yeah. But all of the kind of episode prep and conceptualizing what we're actually going to talk about, that's me. And then I pass on the edits to Romil, who is the founder of Experiment Nation, and he does some great editing. Yeah. I don't know what he uses, but it always manages to sound really hip and youthful. Together. Yeah. Yeah. Everyone's always like, wow, your podcast sounds so great. I'm like, I didn't edit it. Don't thank me.
Yeah, that's something I've learned along the way that, it's all the behind the scenes stuff that has to be done in order to make a product. We all build products, and that's why podcasting is very much a product, because it's all the stuff that you do to actually deliver something to people. So
definitely.
And with Zencastr, do you host also through Zencastr? Because Aram was mentioning they host through Transistor, and we host through Spreaker. So does Zencastr has their own hosting as well for the podcast?
That I don't know. Maybe Jason would know the answer to that.
I don't think so.
I don't think they do. I mean, I use Podbean for hosting, which is fine. It's just a pretty cheap site where you can just add metadata and update your feeds and submit it to all the different places. So that works pretty well. I've actually got my own website, which I handcrafted myself off the back of it with my own self-built content management system and everything, because of course that's something you should be doing in the 2020s and not just using someone else's instead. But yeah, so I've got that going on. But yeah, I think that I'm not aware that Zencastr has a hosting platform. I do use them myself as well. I use their free tier, which is pretty good, although only stores in MP3 format. So I also record my half at least via Audacity at the same time. So I've got a WAV for me, so I can always sound great, even if the guest doesn't, because I've got to get my priorities right. But actually, the guests are always pretty good. There's never any kind of MP3 related issues, really. I just kind of started doing it to backup, and then I just started using that now instead. I also use a platform called Orphonic, which is like a mastering SaaS thing where you can buy credits and upload, and it does some kind of additional compression and filtering and stuff just to try and make it sound a little bit fresh. I don't actually know if it actually helps massively, but it just feels like a cool thing to do, like an extra little seal of approval, make sure I didn't get my settings wrong. I use Otter for transcriptions, which again is a pretty good, I remember seeing Otter on stage once, live transcribing some talk or something, and it was magical. So yeah, I use Otter for that. But yeah, apart from that, not really any real differences. I mean, Audacity for editing, as we said, got all my workflow and shortcuts and everything set up in there. All the scheduling and booking and everything. I actually did use Calendly, but now I use something called SavvyCal, which is like a competitor. The reason I use that is because it actually lets you set more fine-grained controls over how many things can be booked in a certain period of time. So like Calendly would let you do like, oh, you could 1 a day, fine. But sometimes I'd be getting like 5 a week. It's like, okay, no, that's not good. I don't need to interview 5 people a week. So I just found this other thing that is a bit more fine-grained. And I think the only thing about prep is it's interesting actually. So one of the things that I do get told sometimes, like, oh yeah, no, it's so great how natural your conversations are and stuff like that. It's like, well, yeah, they are, but also everything that I've just said to you, I've written down. Like, aside from the follow-up questions, which obviously are off the cuff, like all of my intro, all of my core questions, main areas, they're basically written down, including any kind of pauses or stumbles that I put in there on purpose. Like, there's no naturalness to any of that because I want it to be, I want it to be good. It goes back to the same thing about the editing, right? Like, and actually what I've also had a couple of times, and I don't know if anyone else has had this, is accidentally not recording or accidentally recording through the wrong microphone and it sounds like garbage. And you're like, well, I'm never going to get that guest to re-record. So then re-recording all of my half again to stick it all back in again, but trying to sound natural. So I'm actually pretty good at like acting my, I've become a reasonable quality kind of voice actor now because I can make myself sound like I'm having a conversation even when I'm not.
You're British, you have to be good at that, right?
Well, yeah. But it's interesting, just finally on that, the whole point about pronouns was an interesting one because I had to do that with pronouns because I got them wrong and no one noticed at the time. And then I was listening back to it afterwards and realized that I'd gotten wrong. And I basically re-recorded a bunch of sections there as well to make sure that I wasn't, again, offending or microaggressing anyone. So again, you have to get pretty good at that sort of stuff. But then you never quite get it to match up like audio quality wise because of course the room's different or the microphone's in a different place, so then you end up just recording more and it's just kind of just balloons. But again, you got to have standards, right?
But it goes back also to what we talked about before, really about the data from listeners. Do they really care about all of that, or is it just in our heads that they want that? And that's really like, what do they care? Do they care more about the content and about the guests and about what they're going to learn, or they care about being it so perfect or stuff like that? I guess the answer could be depends, because maybe different people care about different things, like everything, right?
I am 100% sure that no one that listens to my podcast could give a monkey's if there was like an or an error or like a stumble or a bit of clicking in the background or someone's phone beeping or whatever. Like, I'm pretty sure, and I don't care when I listen to other people's podcasts. It's all part of the game, right? But
I cut it anyway. Yeah, I cut it out anyways. Yep.
But do you ask your host, like if you guest on another podcast, do you ask them to let me edit it for you?
No, I don't listen. I don't listen to myself on other people's podcasts, and I'm serious because I've done like 114 episodes now, so I'm pretty used to how I sound and how I edit myself and how I edit other people. And I've got I've got no problem with whatever creative or editing decisions other people want to make and what they leave in that's on them. And I'm a person and I'm going to stumble and say stupid things sometimes, probably like today. However, I don't want to listen back to it because I'll just be sitting there. I'm so used to picking stuff up from my own voice that I don't want to listen to myself and think, oh, I would have taken that bit out. Oh, I would have taken that bit out, because that's not going to help anyone.
Yeah.
On the other end, I've been told, and also I've seen from interviewing other people, that if you're a podcaster, usually you will be also a very good guest, and you will get into the rhythm of how you answer questions and stuff like that. But let's put that all aside for now, and let's talk about the last question really that I want to look into is, how did this experience with building a podcast help you with building other products? So you learn, you change. This is a product on its own, but in our real life outside of podcasting, we are also building products, right? Or in some way or fashion. So I just interested to hear that from you guys.
I'll go first. So I think for us, the biggest benefit with interviewing these product leaders was understanding what frameworks, what tools, what methodologies, practices they use in building their products. And for us, it was, for me personally, it was a bit eye-opening to see how certain people approach things like biases or how they work with their teams and, and planning product roadmaps and things like that. One interesting one that I remember was my conversation with a CPO by the name of Aram, who's at BenchSci, and he said that whenever he joins a company as a CPO, he does like a full 360 product audit. I'm like, product audit? I'm like, what does that look like? And so for us kind of getting that type of exposure to this type of knowledge that you could never get, right? Unless you somehow meet these people and you get to know them. But these are very pointed questions that you get to ask about how they do things, lessons learned, so that we can make better products at the end of the day as a studio. So that's priceless. At the end of the day, getting that knowledge is something that we could have never gotten before, because people would be asking why do you want this information, or what's in it for me, kind of thing. But the great thing with the podcast is that you accomplish a couple different things with it. You build your own reputation and build these great relationships, and you increase your knowledge, while at the same time, a lot of the people that we interviewed are using some of our episodes as featured content. And so it helps with their own brand, their own recognition, and their own thought leadership. And it goes all around. I think it's a win-win for everybody. And so that's kind of what I would say is some of the things that benefited us. Product, I think, is still in many ways, in my opinion, not in a maturity stage in terms of knowledge. There's still a lot of different things happening and people experimenting with different things. And luckily for us, it's a skill set or role that I think is still growing and evolving. So that gives us a lot of exposure to having these, knowledge sharing still take place and, perfecting our craft.
Yeah. I mean, I can only echo some of that as well. You kind of touched on it earlier as well. You don't get to talk to these people and not learn something, because of course you don't. You're talking about people, you're talking about product, you're talking about things with these people. You get the chance to have your own follow-up questions and get them to clarify things. And I think more than that as well, you have to do the research on these people in the first place. So that might mean you read a bunch more books, because you've got some people that have written a book that are coming on, for example. So you've got to do your research. You've not just got to read the book or skim it. You've actually got to understand the core and the key parts of that book. So that helps. Doing the research helps. Having the conversations helps. I think that for me, I'm not sure if it's specifically the actual act of the podcast itself has specifically made me build better products, but it's certainly made me understand product as a discipline much better. I mean, I was fine before, but I kind of see myself as swimming in the product swimming pool all the time now, because I'm spending all of my time talking to people about this stuff, revisiting concepts that maybe had forgotten, or talking about things that I didn't get to yet. There's a lot of stuff around product marketing that I've got better at just by talking to product marketers. And obviously you get a bit of marketing from the promotion of the podcast as well. You start to get a little bit better at building content and release plans and stuff like that. So there's loads of side benefits, but more than anything, I think it's just the prep and the actual talking to these people just makes you it's just via process of osmosis. You just get better because you're just drowning in product thinking all the time.
Yeah. I echo pretty much all of that. I will say with Experiment Nation, it's a little more broad in the sense that we talk to product folks and we also talk to marketing folks. So it has not made me a better product manager because I'm not a product manager, but it has made me a better optimizer. When I first started with the podcast, I had no idea what the hell I was doing. So I would be asking these guests these things that keep me up at night, these questions that I couldn't get an answer to just from Google, and just looking at myself as a product in this market. It's made me so much more competitive in the job market. I've accepted job offers within like 2 days of applying, like less than 48 hours. So just the way that talking to other people who are in the trenches, it just leveled me up so hard looking at myself as a product.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a great point. That's absolutely a great point. Cool. No, this is really awesome to hear about. I actually just remembered, and maybe I lied before about being the last question, because I had the question I wanted to ask before and I forgot. When we were talking about tools, we were talking mostly about the production tools, or inviting people and then recording and then producing and releasing and all that stuff. How do you approach sourcing people? Because one of the main things that we're sometimes like taking a lot of time is to, where do we find the guest? We have a very specific theme to our podcast, but everyone is like that. They have a theme to the podcast. So for us, it has to be related to products that the product people are using in some way or fashion. And it has to, and if we're talking about a specific theme, like right now, we are doing our new series is going to be about no code platforms and how product managers can use that to help them. And sourcing for that is actually pretty hard. It's not easy because most product people don't use no-code systems. And those that are using it are either they're not product people, or they don't understand product so much. And in other series, I approached like, I try to be creative about how I find these people. So I'm looking all over the place, but I try to also approach companies that have these products we want to talk about. We don't want to, we usually don't have them as guests because we don't want it to be biased towards the product. So we prefer a user of the product, but we ask them for help to introduce us to some of their users. And they were ghosting me like there is no tomorrow. So maybe they didn't care about this exposure or whatever, or maybe they were afraid what their users are going to say about them, or maybe they just, didn't care, right? Yeah. So how do you use a specific tools or specific platforms or different ways to source your guests?
So I have no content plan at all, which means that I can basically speak to anyone about anything whenever I want, which means that finding people is actually pretty interesting and easy, because I'm, as you know, Moshe, I'm active on social media. I can kind of hijack conversations if I see someone talking about their new book or some new thing that they're releasing. Oh, hey, would you want to come talk to me about it? Of course, everyone does, because people love talking about the stuff that they're doing. And every now and then it'll be like with maybe a more high profile person, you kind of have to chase them a little bit because, of course, they're busy and they've got all these other different offers that they can take up instead. So like that, I think it took like a year to get Melissa Perry scheduled in, for example, because she's super busy and she's got her own podcast and all those other reasons. But at the same time, it's very rare that someone says, no, I'm not interested. It's very rare that people even ask you how many downloads you've got, or like, anything. Like people, if you go to people asking them to tell their story, and especially if they've got something to hawk from their side as well, then of course they're going to be interested in that. I think my only content plan is, hey, I work in product. If it's interesting to me, it should be interesting to other people that work in product. And if it's not, then I'm sorry, just don't listen to that episode.
You want to go first, Tracy?
Yeah, sure. So in terms of doing outreach, I'm very lucky that a lot of people actually approach us to be on the show. So normally I'll go through the process of kind of onboarding them onto the show. Sometimes I'll just be on a random virtual coffee chat with someone in my network. And if I like what I hear from them, I'll just flat out ask like, hey, would you be interested in being on my podcast? And then other times I'll read a book and I'll be like, holy shit, I learned so much from this book. And then I'll reach out to them cold, and it's never not worked for us. So people are just really happy to hop on a call and promote their work.
Yeah.
That's what we experience with startups.
Yeah, it's so true what Tracy said. We have kind of a few different approaches how we do it. So when I do interviews with people at the end, when I have my debrief, I always ask for a referral. Typically what I've seen is like the people who come from that are really high quality people, because the person that I'm interviewing should be good. And then they refer 2-3 other people, which leads me to having some next follow-up speakers. Then recently we've had some more inbounds coming. It's typically like agencies or PR spokespeople who have a client who's doing a book launch or whatever, and they need more, publicity. So that's also been something that we've been seeing happen. But the way we started off was, what we did was initially the first 10, 15 people that we had on our show were all like existing clients or friends. Then once we got those up and running on our YouTube page, because we focused on video first, we then created campaigns where we used LinkedIn Sales Navigator, created save lists, where we created like our ICP was like a product leader professional within a certain company size, within a certain territory. And then we curated these lists, and then we exported them, got the contact information, and then reached out via email cadence tools. And we basically say, hey, we'd love to have you on the show. Here's a link to our YouTube page. Check it out. And then here's a form that we recently started doing. We then send these individuals to the spreadsheet, and then, this form, they fill it out, and then we review all the responses and then pick who we want to go interview. And this kind of like system has been really working for us, because we send out, say, 500 new emails out every month. And then from that, we get a bunch of responses, and then we kind of cherry pick who comes in. And what we've seen is that over time, the YouTube page that we have and then some other material, when people see it, they're like, okay, these guys interviewed these people, like there must be something there, right? So like that validation, it takes time to build, but once you have it, leverage it, because it's like probably your biggest social proof you could ever have. Getting it up initially, leverage your friends, people in your network to come on, because once people see 10 to 15 episodes, they're like, okay, this guy seems to be something trustworthy, right? It's not like some weirdo. So that's what I would recommend. And it's been working really well for us.
And maybe don't, for everyone out there, maybe don't pick such a niche podcast like we did. But, but hey, no one have done it before, so we enjoy doing it.
Hey, that's what it is.
I can't believe. Oh, sorry. I almost forgot. Referrals are actually super important too. I just remembered at the end of every podcast episode, we ask our guests, like, who should we interview next? And the quality of the recommendations that come out of that one question, it's usually like, I'll be like, oh my gosh, I would die if I got to interview this person. This person is so influential. I follow their content all the time. That is truly where you get really quality guests.
And hey, you have 2 more referrals here on the show to each one of you. So
absolutely.
Win-win. Win-win. Perfect. No, I think that's all the question I had. Matt, did you have other questions for our panel, or do you guys have questions for us about podcasting?
No, I think I've been drinking the podcast Kool-Aid for long enough that if I asked any more questions, it would just be like just even more information into my little brain. So I think I should probably quit while I'm ahead on the podcasting questions.
The only thing I would just maybe say is one of the things that we've seen been a struggle of like a pain point for us, where we could only do a certain amount of questions, is if it's too general. So like, even though yours is harder to maybe come by with speakers for, but if you have a niche and something that people don't talk about, and it's like a focus theme, then I think that where you can then get relevant eyeballs towards who want just plug in, listen to what you have to say, and then plug out, right? And we learned that through trial and error, because scaling out a system has its like limits unless you have like more of a focus. So just my last parting words.
Yeah, and there's also this argument that you don't need to have all of the listeners in the world to be a successful podcast. Like, obviously, if we were all running, I don't know, true crime podcasts or celebrity gossip podcasts or something like that, we'd all have 10x the number of listeners, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, if you're running a podcast about a thing that people that care about that thing also care about, then whatever the size of that audience, you're doing something meaningful for them. So I think that, like, you look at some of the blog posts and whatever, and they're saying, oh yeah, you need to have this many listens to be in the top, whatever. It's like, none of that matters. None of that matters at all.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And that's the feedback we've received, Moshe and I, doing this show, is we've helped even one person when they were trying to find a product that fit their need. The show served that one person. It gave them a direction to find, hey, I'm going to use this tool because I listened to the show. And, we may serve a niche group of people, but if we're helping that group of people solve a problem, I mean, that's what product's all about, right? So
I also picked a couple of products at work based on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. Me too.
I just assumed that the only person listening is going to be my mom.
That's a good way to do it. That's a good.
My mum is not at all. My mum is not at all convinced why I even have a podcast. She very specifically asked me why I had one and how I never used to have one and why I've got one now. So I'm pretty sure she's not going to listen to this, but she's not a fan.
My daughters at school, they like to say to their friends that their dad has a podcast.
Yes.
And they're like, why does your dad has a podcast? Because they're used to more of real crime podcasts and stuff like that.
Yeah. My daughter's friend heard me and you on Spotify, and he's like, your dad must be rich. He's on Spotify. And I was like, no, it's not the case, but thanks. I appreciate that.
That is very cute. That's very cute.
Yep.
And my kids just make fun of my podcast voice, which is also very, very cute, kind of, I guess.
Well, when they grow older, actually, you can get them to work for the podcast, which this is what we've done. If you listen, the intro for our podcast is my daughter's voice.
Yes.
Again, shoestring budget. And she did some summer editing for us last summer.
Yep.
Oh, that's awesome.
So that's also it could be a family event if you want.
Yeah. And just make it fun. At the end of the day, that's what we went into with the mission. Do not make this work, and make it fun, make it enjoyable. And if people find value out of it, then that's just a bonus, really.
Exactly.
100%.
Thank you so much, everyone. Tracy, Aram, Jason, Matt, this was a pleasure. I really enjoyed that episode. It was also the first episode that we did with video.
Yes.
We might do more in the future.
Yes.
So that was nice. We almost all of us had our podcast t-shirt on, so we're very proud of it. I think we will have to make one for Aram and say, well, he will have to wear two.
We surprised him. That was a surprise.
Yes, two. So it's like one in the front, one in the back, for his two podcasts, right? Thank you very much, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks for having us.
It's been a pleasure.